Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Norman Bissell. I'm the director of the Scottish Centre for Geopoetics, and I've written some haiku in my time. I'd like to welcome you all on behalf of the Scottish Centre for Geopoetics to this virtual conversation on the way of haiku and geopoetics with Gilles Fabre. Gilles will give a presentation to which I will contribute, and there will be plenty of time for questions and discussion. Please stay muted and use the chat to tell us where you're joining us from, and use it also to ask questions. And of course, once we start the questions and discussion, you can also raise your hand in that feature at the bottom of the screen if you wish to speak. And we'll finish at 7 p.m. at the latest. So I'd like now to introduce to you Gilles Fabre. He's a French national who lives in Dublin, Ireland. His haiku have won awards and been published in various journals and anthologies in Ireland, the UK, Australia, India, Japan, the USA and Canada in English, and France and Canada in French. He's also been published in Japanese and Portuguese. His second collection, Along the Way, A Search for the Spirit of the World, published by Alba, was selected by the Haiku Foundation for the Touchstone Award shortlist in 2020. And you'll see a link shortly during the course of the presentation, and at the end of it, you'll see a link to his website, Haiku Spirit, and to the journal that he edits, Seashores. So I'm very pleased to welcome, let's have a warm welcome to Gilles Fabre.
Thank you very much, Norman. Thank you very much. Yeah, we'll see a few information later on seashores, etc. I think we need just to start maybe right away with haiku. So what we're going to talk about, and I will show the presentation, is haiku. What is it? And most importantly, because most people know what haiku is, sometimes there are some wrong conceptions or wrong ideas. You receive things, people think, oh, here's I wrote a haiku. We'll go back probably to that in the questions. But what can haiku and the way of haiku, the spirit of haiku, what can it bring us? And this discussion will try to explore this and also put a link with Kenneth White and especially geopoetics. In different times, you'll see a few quotes. And we'll try those quotes to also get a small breathing space, not to talk all the time, and to try to reflect ourselves from what we think we can get from haiku, from poetry in general, and from nature. So we're going to start, but I think to set the scene, I'm going to share the screen, and Norman is going to read haiku. I think it'd be the best thing to do is to read some haiku to start with. We'll talk about that later. To just set the scene and to get a feel of haiku now, if you don't mind, Norman.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Gilles. I'm delighted and honored to read some of Matsuo Basho's haiku, one of the founders. Late autumn, the neighbour, what is he up to? First snow, thankfully, I am in my hermitage. What do they eat in this small house, in the shade of an autumn willow? Winter seclusion, again, resting against this pillar. Frosty wind, swollen with mumps, the face of a man in pain. 5 or 6 people with tea cakes sitting around the hearth.
Thank you very much, Norman. I think it was appropriate to start with Matsuo Basho. It's not an effort. His haiku is still very good. As you probably know, Matsuo Basho is considered as the creator of haiku. It's complicated to say he's a creator, but he did start haiku and definitely is famous as the origin of haiku. So you all know the rules of haiku. And we've seen some examples there, although they're translations, that you have, of course, 17 syllables in Japanese, or they call onji, let's say syllables or sounds or phonemes, whatever you call them, roughly 17 syllables. There's a kirigi, which is a difficult notion because it's more a grammatical word in Japanese, a grammatical term that allows the haiku to be split in two, or to arise, to bring something, that element of surprise. Doesn't really exist in Western languages, so it's not translated the same way. And of course, as you all know, nature. There's always what they call a kigo, originally a season word, because haiku is definitely linked, it's strongly linked to nature. So much so there's a legend in Japan, attributed, I think, to Matsuo Basho, but they don't know of, at that time, you have to realize that what they call the haiku masters were actually making money with haiku. They were judges of competitions or evenings. And Matsuo Basho was getting famous. He had a lot of disciples. He had probably 2,000 followers, you call them now, or students. And he was asked in one evening by a rich merchant, because the money was coming from, most of them, merchants wanted to learn to write, to haiku, etc. So he was asked to pay money to explain his poetry, to explain what is haiku, what is at that time they called it haikai, it was the same. And so Matsuo Basho arrived, and there was, imagine there's a number of people waiting for him to have that, almost that preach on haiku. And then he's about to start, and there's a bird behind him starting singing. He looks at it and he said, listen, I have nothing to add. I'll just take the money. So it is nature. There's nothing to add when you have a bird behind you singing. It's the idea of that, okay, with the haiku. And haiku has crossed. It started in Japan and is very, very rooted in Japanese culture, in civilization, in their writing, but it has crossed. And that's why we talk about haiku now tonight. And I could see earlier with the people, a lot of people are from different parts of the world. Everybody writes haiku or reads haiku across the world. So we're going to keep on to give that example. Norman is going to read some haiku by Alan Spence, who is a Scottish poet, and he was the guest of Seashore. I think if every time I show that, I might get €10. So the Seashore number 10, he was a special guest. And we're doing that Seashore. There's always an interview of people. They give their perspective on haiku, their vision of haiku, and it can be very different. We'll see tonight. People have different ideas of haiku. And he also sent a selection of his favorite haiku. So Norman is going to read a few, and then we're going to talk about haiku more deeply.
Thank you, Gilles. Just by way of introduction, I interviewed Alan Spencer. We had a conversation last year as part of this series of virtual conversations, and he lives in Edinburgh still, and he was a very engaging contributor that night, and you can watch that on our YouTube channel. So, middle of the night, the traffic lights changing for no one. The early dark, an empty wheelchair outside the pub. Country road, too dark to see the flowers, but their scent is yellow. Rain falling, especially on me. The whole sky and more, reflected in each raindrop hanging from that branch. And we'll just read this one again. It's a good one. Middle of the night, the traffic lights changing for no one.
Thank you, Norman. Yeah, my mistake. I put twice the same one. I must like it. So we saw haiku from Basho translations, and we saw haiku in English from the Western world. And you can see the correspondence. There are differences, I said the kirigi, and it's always a risk. Sometimes I do workshops, so people always ask a definition of haiku. I don't know if there's a definition of haiku, but I always say there's a concept, and basically it's an objective transcription, or it's an objective sketch of a moment that experienced by the poet through the senses. It could be any sense. It could be hearing, it could be smelling, it could be touching. So it's a sense. And so the haiku, basically, that famous haiku moment, that haiku moment is shared. Haiku is a bit inactive. It's a dual poetry. I think there's the reader, it's active. There's the poet wants to share, and the reader has to take some of it. As you can see, it's very short. There's not many words. So you need also, there's a certain action, but it's not cryptic. Some people say, I don't understand. It's a metaphor. Something. Haiku is not cryptic. It's very objective. Okay. Alan Spence actually in the interview said a nice sentence. For him, haiku shows the true nature of things. That's not a bad concept, I think he has. And I read also somewhere that some people say the haiku moment is important because it reveals the sacred, but in a very unreligious way, because it's not metaphysical, it's not philosophical haiku. It's that idea of sacredness when you read a haiku, and that's the impact. Sometimes people have that vision. And I always find that sentence interesting because, as you know, Japanese language comes from Chinese, and they've adopted the kanji, or the characters or ideograms. And in Chinese, the word poetry, because every word, once the concept is formed by an association of ideograms or graphic, and the word poetry in Chinese is formed by the association of two characters. One is sacred, temple, and the other one is just words, because for them poetry offers sacred words.
Can I come in there, Gilles,
course, yeah.
for a minute? I'm an atheist, and I find words like sacred obscure the reality. They make it sound like it's religious, it comes from God, who in my view doesn't exist, when in fact it's a special perception of the connection between a human and the nature of which humans are part. How would you respond to that?
I would say you're right, and that's there's also that Japanese Shintoism, which is not a religion as such; it's an animist. Some people say it's religion. They do give spirit, so they do give energy, vital energy. We'll come back to that word later. That breathing space, that breathing energy. They give that to objects, to animals, to trees, to objects, to stones. So I think it's that connection between human and nature. And it's an important connection. It used to be very important. It's on the way out at the moment, but it used to be very important to have that connection. And that's where maybe people see a religious notion in that, but it's not. I think you're right. When I say sacred, I think sacred doesn't have to be religious. It's very important for men. We're going to see in the presentation a few etymologies. It's very important to use the right words. And haiku is one discipline where you have to use the right word. And sometimes some haikus are not good because they're not using the right words. Mm-hmm. I always keep that sentence of Albert Camus, who used to say, Albert Camus say, choosing the wrong words, or having the wrong words is always adding to the issues of the world. I know it's a bit extreme, but we need to name the right things. We need to use the right name, the right words. And haiku has that. It's precise, few words, and it has that. So I think that's where probably what you see. And the same with mystic. Mystic is badly used. Mystic origin mystic means only that you care for what is important, what is vital. Then, okay, it got a religious thing, but mystic originally is just what's important for humans. And we go back to that Shintoism, we go back to that relation humans used to have with nature. And I think haiku brings that, and we'll see that when we talk more clearly about the haiku spirit, or the way of haiku. So what I'm saying now is always controversial, but as you could see there with the Basho and Alan Spence, you could argue that haiku is not a poem, or it's not a poem in our Western sense, because we're used to the personal poetry, we're used to lyricism, rhymes, metaphors, all those, you could call them tricks or artifices. Maybe haiku is not a poem, but what is for sure is that it's definitely poetry. I always say it's a shortcut to poetry. And that's what I see with haiku. You just tell the poetry, and again, that's Chinese influence, because in Chinese poetry, the origin poetry, they say you don't tell a story, you don't tell a legend, you don't rely on poetic device, on rhetoric. What you do, you see, the poet should see and tell. And that's what haiku is. You see and tell, you share. Let's be even nicer, say you share, as simple as that. And also, as you could see with some examples, you can write haiku about everything. So that's where some people think it's not exactly poetry. There's that famous quote of John Keats, great poet, but who said you cannot write haiku about turnip. Yes, but you can in haiku. Issa wrote a very, very famous haiku, everybody loves it, when he said, the turnip digger shows me the way with a turnip. He even used it twice in the haiku. So I think you can write haiku about everything. That's the reality. And then also what you could say, maybe it's not a poem, as I said, but it's definitely poetry. And it's like a few brushstrokes. We go back to China. We go back to the poetry, the landscape poetry, and in Chinese painting also, they say you only need a few brushstrokes to show landscape. You know, you remember those prints, and it's only black and white. It's just with ink. And so, because the principle in Chinese poetry and Chinese painting is to capture the living spirit. We'll go back to the term spirit later. It's to capture the living spirit of the subject, but without reproducing its presence, without reproducing the presence of human. And there again, we're very much into the haiku, where it's impersonal. It's not you. It's not about you. It's not a me, me, me. It's just more a representation, an impression. And that may be why sometimes we think haiku is metaphorical or metaphysical. It's not. It's just a direct connection. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So, and I say sometimes also, haiku really, when you look at that and you think that it's pure poetics. And that's why we're going to talk a bit about Kenneth White and geopoetics, because he's used that term poetics. And I like also the way Kenneth White used to use that word poetics. He really explored the word poetics, and he went down to the Greek, which comes from nos poetica, which is not poetry as we conceive it. It's more the power. He used to say that nous poetica is the power, the capacity for a man or woman to understand what is real, the reality. And haiku deals with reality. And to go back also with an anecdote on reality, if you look in Chinese language, the word reality is used, it's the same word as truth. In China, if you say reality or truth, there's only one word, because for them, the truth is reality. And haiku is always in that sense, the reality is the truth. And the root also for truth in China, or reality, is two characters. One is I, and the other one is the world, because the reality is what the eye can see. There's nothing else. And that's where haiku is also. So we could touch on a bit of Kenneth White with geopoetics. So I chose a few, you know, Kenneth White, the late Kenneth White, who died in the summer. In fact, Kenneth White mentioned haiku in his first prose book. Am I right, Norman?
Yeah, yeah.
Norman has to validate all what I'm going to say.
Well, I do go back a long way with Kenneth White to when I was a young student at Glasgow University. And yeah, he that picture that you see just now on screen of him was taken at the Sorbonne in 2019, where there was a conference that he was one of the main speakers. And yeah, I think it was in Letters from Gourgonel, which was, I don't know if it was, he had a prose book out in France before that, I think, Incandescent Limbo. But I think
so, yeah.
Yeah, it was really one of the very early books, Letters from Gourgonel. And we've got a lot of his books here on Ling in the Scottish Centre for Geopoetics, which is next door to where I'm sitting just now. And we've got probably one of the best collections of White's work there. So yeah, he was into haiku, and I don't know when he started, but certainly by his early 20s, he knew what haiku were.
Yeah, and he was, as you say, into haiku, and he liked haiku. And I would give you a few seconds just to read, especially the first quote from Kenneth White. That's from the Blue Road in Canada, and I think he's right, and he's actually asking that question: is it a poem? It's a question, but he understood the way of haiku, the spirit of haiku, and then I go back into that. Not only just the haiku as a form, but he could see the spirit of haiku. So I just leave you to 1 minute to have a kind of a break to read that.
Well, while we're reading it, can I suggest you're covering a lot of ground, Gilles? Could you maybe slow down a little bit? I know,
sure. Of course, yeah.
I know. I suggested we need to watch our time, but I think people need to take some of it in a wee bit more.
Okay, no problem. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much. Okay, so they just kind of some quotes just to help us a bit to go around and to give more notion around haiku from a different perspective, perspectives that are also linked to nature. Okay, and that sentence is actually in the founding text of the geopoetics movement of the institution, and you can say that he actually quotes Matsuo Basho right away. So it also shows the importance of Matsuo Basho in his style and his way of life. Also, we talk about the way of haiku, and it was way of life that presence. So.
Yeah, on that point as well, when when he came back to Glasgow to be a young lecturer at the university in the Modern Languages department, as it was then, in between 1963 and 1967, he set up the Jargon Group, which was basically it was a platform for him to give talks outside the official university about all kinds of subjects. For example, the American Beat poets or the Russian revolutionary poets. But he also gave a talk about Taoism and about Chuang Tzu. I don't think he included Basho at that point, but he was very much influenced by Taoism and by Zen Buddhism. So that's how far back his knowledge of, and maybe even before that, his knowledge of Eastern thinking was, and Eastern writing.
And also he wrote haiku. And I was lucky enough a few years ago to publish one of his books. He wanted to publish all his essays on haiku, and some haiku selection made. So he also published haiku, of course, in his books, but also in that book. I'll talk about it at the end. And Norman is going to read a few haiku by Kenneth White now also.
You can't even see his shadow, but he's there, the kingfisher. That branch among the fern was a red stag, sheltering from the rain. A blue-grey stillness where the dark waters flow, night of the heron. North Dakota, two magpies perched on a buffalo skull. A memory of my old room, the cup with the broken handle that became a bowl. Something reddening out there, very quietly reddening. They call it autumn.
Thank you very much. So we talk about the Chinese influence, and it'll come back, okay? Because haiku is Japanese poetry, and the origin of Chinese poetry was influenced by landscape or nature, Chinese poetry. So we'll see that along the way. So why is haiku so attractive now? Why do we have that meeting tonight? Why do people want to know about haiku or write haiku? And it's something that I explored a lot. Is it because it's short? Because it's small? Possibly. We said that people are competing for attention. There's a very little attention span now. People like texting, sending emails, I don't know. Is it because the wrong idea, sometimes people say because it's easy. I get many people, they buy a book, a haiku, they read, also that's easy. So it's easy to challenge them and say, okay, but write a haiku now and see if it's easy. So I don't think it's because it's easy, but I think it's something people feel connected. It's poetry. I think people need poetry at the moment, and maybe some poetry has become maybe more difficult, less accessible. I don't know. And it's a shortcut, as I say, to poetry. With all the good things that can be a shortcut. Some people don't like shortcut. I think it can be good to have a shortcut. So I think it's that. But I always say, I think even if people don't realize it or don't understand it, what they see in the haiku, and we saw it with some haiku there about Alan Spence, they're fantastic, is the spirit of haiku. So I'm going to try to explain that. And it's not explaining what haiku is, but what haiku can be also in the concept. Okay. I will still explain, and we talked earlier on sacred and different terms. Spirit also, it's important to use that term in the Latin sense. Spirit, again, as Norman said earlier, it could be religious, but spirit means espiritus, which is an onomatopoeia. It comes from the sound of it. In Latin, spirit is a breath. It's when you breathe. It's an energy that comes out. And it's also something non-explainable. At that time, they didn't know what the wind was. They always say spirit is like you see the wind, but you don't understand what it is. Now science can tell you why there's wind, but at the time, it was a mystery. It was something you could feel, you could see, but you could not see. That's spiritus. So it's important to think more the term like energy, breathing of haiku. Okay? So what you have, we started with that, and that's what most people know. Haiku deals first with nature, all living things. And that's the spirit of haiku. It's linked with nature and the world around us. And as you can see, I haven't used the word environment yet. I'll explain later why, but I think it's better to talk about a living world or living beings around us. and he treats them with equal attention. You know all those haiku by Isa about all the small insects. You got haiku basho about a whale, but the next haiku will be about a fox, or it could be about a fly. It treats everything the same way. There's no judgment, or as we say in French, value judgment, jugement de valeur, which is not translatable, but you don't give a judgment on things. And that's what it is, haiku. And also it shows, it's worth also remembering here that in Japanese, and the same in the Chinese or Asian philosophies, originally humans are only part of nature. It's not above nature, it's not underneath, it's just part of nature. And now, and that's what Norman said earlier, it's that connection with nature. And maybe now in the world, I think the man or the humans have gradually put themselves above nature. And we can see the consequences, the negative consequences. We can see the catastrophe around, because we disconnected from nature. And I think haiku, the spirit haiku, when you read those haiku, you get that connection back. You go back to the source. It makes us also an observer. As I said earlier, it's impersonal. It's not me, 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 me. The Japanese say watashi, watashi, watashi. It's not that. It's not about you. It's about the thing you can see. Of course, you have a presence, you have a perception, and the perception is an important term in haiku. But it's just about you show you're only part of the world. You're not more important, you're not less important than the rest. And haiku makes the poet and also the reader, I insisted earlier to say that there's an active relation between the poet and reader, feel the experience, that relation, that connection with nature in general. Of course, now there's more and more haiku about people, about life and the world, and that's fine. It's a different connection, but we have that. So that part to teach us, it's a power to teach us the potential to change the perception of the world.
Yeah. On that very point, I think Kenneth White often uses or used to use the phrase to see the world anew or afresh. That was one of his basic ideas, and as you say, using all the senses, as you mentioned earlier, not just the seeing, but the listening and the smelling. There's an Alan Spence, just to come back there for a moment, a wonderful one of his haiku. I'm not sure if it's in the little book Glasgow Zen, which I have here somewhere. Yeah, Glasgow Zen. And there is a Glasgow Zen group, interestingly enough, which I used to do as a Zen with. And in this, he says, a second-hand bookshop, my books as musty as the rest. And of course, I think that appeals to just about every writer that I've ever recited that haiku to, because it's like a sense of regret that your book is in there with all the rest, and it's getting musty with as often happens in these old second-hand bookshops. So yeah, using the smell as well as the seeing and hearing is just as important.
Yeah, and as you can see, I've put a few quotes again. It's just to kind of give you the concept with Kenneth White and the relation. Hopefully, I'm not wrong. Hopefully, there is a relation with what you read there and what haiku can be. And Kenneth White also was influenced by some French philosophers. Merleau-Ponty said that the thing man needs to learn is to relearn about the world. And I think that's what we learned. We lost our teaching, our knowledge of the world. So, and you can see, I took some example there of Kenneth White, what he said about geopoetics. But I think when you look at that, for me, it's very personal. For me, it is what the spirit of haiku is. And later on, we're going to touch on the way haiku, because we're getting there with the way haiku. And make a small difference with the spirit of haiku and the way of haiku. The way of haiku is the way you deal in life with things. And the spirit of haiku is reading the haiku. The way of haiku is then it's with the poet, it's with the person reading haiku or practice of haiku. It can be reading or writing. So about the way of haiku now. Oh, we'll finish. That's in the Gannett philosophy. All poetry comes facing loveliness. And that's what you have when you, I talked earlier about the haiku moment. And the haiku moment is that you face a loveliness. You face something, a moment, emotion. You face it and you write your haiku. So that's what we had. And also it's the beauty of the world. I always say the word of beauty of the world. And Wallace Stevens is quoted many times by Kenneth White, and he said, what we need to learn is the beauty of the world. That's what, let's not forget the most important thing, the world is beautiful. And people forget that, I think, and haiku can bring you back to that reality. So when I talk about the way of haiku now, and when I say the way of haiku is very generic, it's very, everybody's different thing, and I never talked about value judgment earlier. I don't have, I love haiku, I love a lot of writers, but I don't make a judgment. Some people write haiku like they do Sudoku or crossword. I have no problem with that. Some people think haiku should be just a text on your phone. But there's some people take haiku seriously. They do explore, they do try to have that relationship with the world. And that's the way haiku, and that's what Matsuo Basho had, and some haiku writers. Alan Spence, obviously, seems to me he has it. They try to understand the world through the haiku, through their relationship with the nature, with the world. And that's what I'm trying to explain with the way haiku. Because I think for me, I always say to people, I think haiku can help us. I said it poetry earlier, definitely poetry for me as a role. There's not enough poetry, I think, in the world, but that's, and haiku is more direct, I think. And it can help us in our life, and I think it can help us in nature, because it deals ultimately with nature. So I'm going to try to explain that, because I think for me, haiku, it teaches us to appreciate those small moments. And we talk about, I think here it is, Kenneth White, enlarge the sense of life. That's what the way haiku does. You spend your day with more attention to the events. Your life can be a bit fuller. You can have a fuller life. Paul Derlin used to say to live poetically on earth. That's a great ambition, but I think haiku can bring you there. It's just the idea that it develops attention to everything. Nature first, originally, but also to the world, to people next to you in the bus, to somebody crossing the street, to a bird, anything. It brings you, develop that attention to the world. I think that's what, and then what you do, the haiku, basically, it's a daily event, okay? But it's a poetic, fundamental experience. It offers a key or a tool, I think, to be at one or to be in harmony with the elements, okay? And it can help you to have a better understanding or knowledge of the reality. I go back to that term reality, because I think some of the problems in the world is that we're totally outside reality. We're outside nature, that's for sure, and we're also outside reality. So I think haiku can always bring you back to that reality. You have that sensation of your surroundings, your place in the world. And each haiku that you may write or you may read, I think it offers a welcome pause. It's like a breathing space. I'm trying to give you some breathing space with those quotes, but it's that. It's just for a second, you pause. Your mind is different. You reach a different perception. So that's one thing. It makes you slow down if you want. And I think also it gives you back the place that humans should have. I think some of the issue in the world, because we took too much place. There's more, I think we live in a world where there's less and less place for us, and we find less and less our place in the world. And the same for the animals. I think haiku can bring you back a bit. It shows you're not a ruler of the world, okay? I know Kenneth White used to love Nietzsche. Nietzsche say we're all too human. I always say it's not that the problem. There's too much of humans in us. There's too much of human. It's not all too human. It's just there's too many humans, I think. Or there's too much of human presence on the world, and it brings issue. There's not a balance. And I think, and that brings me now to nature, and it's almost closing that thing. As we saw earlier, when it said the world arises, the contact. I think that's where we talk with nature. Haiku can bring you back to nature too. And it has an impact on nature, because as we've seen, it deals with nature, it shows you nature, okay? And I'm convinced that in that case, you can have a different relationship with nature. It can show you things, and it happens at the moment in Japan, where people write haiku on things that are disappearing. You must have heard of the Kigo, the season words. So they used to have all those words. It's an incredible encyclopedia, more than 5,000 words of things they have, like different animals, different flowers and all. And they're actually now checking, because those saijiki, those almanac, or those dictionary, are published every 20 or 40 years. And some people they look at it and see what has disappeared or what has changed. For example, the mosquitoes used to come in June, now they're in April. Those changes are visible thanks to haiku. They just realize, yeah, can we write now about a mosquito in April? So it shows it's a small thing, but it just shows that it shows the way life evolves, and it can make you react, I think, for that. There's a decline at the moment in the world. There's a decline in the experience we have with the world, with nature. And I think haiku can bring you back. As you know, probably some countries in Scandinavia, for example, some doctors actually prescribe the people to have 2 days off and go to the forest or go to the beach, because it does as good as medication. So haiku has that feeling. The way haiku is to live a bit in the different world. Here, Kenneth White used the word or culture, but I think that's what it means in that. Okay, and here we finish with that quote also on the haiku and try to see the rest. Yeah, what I meant to say that is the practice of haiku is the capacity to make us sensitive again to many forms of life, to see what's next to us and to consider it as important as us. Okay, so that's why I think it could have an impact on our life, it can have an impact on nature. There's a lot of different cases, and maybe in the questions I can give you more precise ideas on that, I think. Okay, so it just shows, it gives value, it shows the value of what's important around us, what we forget, and it makes you see things. That's what I like. And we know seeing things that go back to that Chinese eye and reality world, where we see, usually we care for things we see. If you look at nature, if you want to, for example, the moment we see the invisible, I shouldn't say that, invisible ocean, but we see plastic on the sea. So it's an issue. We know it. But what we don't see is all the small plastic that's in our lungs that surround, because there's a plastic or synthetic playground for kids next door to you. And there's at least as much plastic there, but we don't see it. So I will say, when you see something, you do care more. You're motivated to change things. And I think haiku can bring you there. So I think, Norman, we're finished. Okay. You okay with that, or do you want me?
We'll I'm sure we'll get points coming. People.
Oh, you finished? Sorry, I want to finish with that.
Yeah.
Haiku is this, and we go back to geopoetics. I think that sentence is exactly what haiku is. The focal point is the earth. We forget that, and I think haiku gives you that concept, that possibility. I should have finished with that. I think it's a good one. Now you may all say that extrapolate, but I do think there's a lot of common points with geopoetics and haiku, or the way of haiku. But Norman can maybe.
Yeah, well, just that quotation that you've given us at the end there that I'm reading at the moment, Gilles. It's we ask ourselves what might be a focal point in the world at this moment. I came to the conclusion it had to be the very earth on which we try to live. Was that from Kenneth White and the founding statement of the International Institute of Geopoetics? I
think it is in the founding text.
Yeah.
Everything I've got there, I got him in his books now. I think it's in founding text. It's a conclusion, I think, is founding text, but I'm 90% sure, okay?
Yeah, and I very much agree with you on the key point that you made there, that by paying more attention to the world, to the earth, that it makes us care more about it. And also I think there's a very strong sense, towards the end of your presentation, a very strong sense of hope, because we're looking at, if we look at the news, or we're looking at what's going on all over the world, but particularly not only in Gaza, but also in other countries, and the way in which the climate crisis is speeding up. People feel a bit powerless about that. And yet I think what you've presented here is that you can change the way you view things by writing haiku and by responding more positively, caring about all things, not just the elephant, but the ant and so forth, So I think there's a lot of points coming in now on the chat. So I'll shut up and see what people are saying here.
Questions. I'll stop the presentation. So here there's a thank you. I should have finished with that. Okay, just give me 1 second to stop sharing and we can have.
Okay, that's great.
So is there a question? Let's see. Where's my chat?
Yeah. Yeah. People are saying it's an amazing, thank you for that amazing presentation, Gilles. So much beauty to reflect on, including Kenneth White's beautiful words to us. I am loving this. Yeah.
I know you can delete the ones that are bad, is it? It's good.
Are you sure you don't come from Glasgow? You've got an element of Glasgow humour about you. That comment about €10 for every time you hold up your book, Nice one.
Okay. Is there any question? I don't know. Like, it's difficult. We planned a few things, but Norman, but we just thought there was a good deal of talk. And as you said, maybe it was a bit heavy. That's why I tried to put those sentences of Kenneth White. I hope it didn't confuse things, but I think there is a parallel between what I was trying to explain and what he's trying to also achieve. And his reflection.
There's a comment from Sukima in Glasgow saying haiku arose out of Renga.
Yeah.
Renga has a 1,000-year history long before Basho. From the opening verse, the haiku developed a haiku, some mosaic of moments, often composed by a group. Completed Renga is collective, collaborative.
Yeah. And that's why we say that Basho is the creator, the originator, because it was a Ranga, and the Ranga usually was a collective thing, and it was a group, and there would be a judge, so somebody who had a special capacity in poetry. Basho was that, so he would be paid, he would be fed, etc., and be the judge. But usually he would open. The first verse is 5-7-5, so 17 syllables, if I count properly, and it would open. And then it would be 7 and 7. The second one was called the Wakiku, and etc., etc. 36 usually. The evening they were drinking a lot also, and he was making money on that, judging on that. That was his. But he was so good. His first verse, the Hoku, was so good. That's where when we read the Banso Basho haiku, most of them are part of those. They're the first one of those Hoku. They were so good. He put so much depth in it and scope that. It became independent. You could read it on its own without the rest. And that's the origin of haiku. And this is the originate for that. But the Ranga, we call it Ranga or Renku now. It's still very popular. People do it. It's a more bit of a work of fiction because you have a code that at some stage you have to have a haiku or a verse about the moon, about the different season. There's those codes to follow. But the first one is the most important in a way, is that it sets the scene, and that's where which is the origin, and slowly people have written just the first one. It was independent, was good enough to be independent on its own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. So the Renga did predate, but haiku, but
and continued.
Sorry,
and continued. You know,
and continued. Yeah. Well, it continued in Glasgow. When I was still living in Glasgow over 20 years ago, I remember. Alec Finlay was one of the Renga leaders, and so was Colin Will. And Colin Will even dressed up in Japanese robes for the occasion. And I remember sitting there in the back of the tramway, the hidden garden, and there was a nice little platform there where we sat round and we wrote, and then I can't remember the technical term for the Renga master, but he or she, whoever it was, they would choose the one that would go best with the previous one.
Yeah,
so
there's usually one person in charge.
Yeah. So I'm going to bring in Alistair. Alistair Duncan would like to speak or ask something. Yeah.
It's interesting. You sort of just answered my question with that. Now, I just got very curious about Renga actually, because. Why? I'm really interested in the collaborative space, I guess, and that tends to often follow creation, doesn't it? I think things are on my mind. There's something people got a great interest in called centering at the moment, which I know almost nothing about. There's something David Boehm's dialogue group says. I'm really interested about poetry happening in the space between people. And
it is a social thing, Alistair. It is, you're right, and it still exists. And I've done one we did one in Ireland a few years ago, and it's interesting. For me, it's not haiku, the way I say it, but it's a group thing, and it was very social for a lot of reasons. And people improve because you have to trust, of course, the master or the person did give you, and that's where Matsuo Basho was getting paid. He's giving advice on what to do, how to write, etc. He's influencing in a way, also maybe the verses, but he's doing that. And some people still do it in Japan now. It's very social. They do an evening, and they have an objective, and they say, well, we'll do 12 or we'll do 20, and they stay and they drink, of course, but they do, and they do it. And there's still that group idea in Japan. In 2019, I was in Tokyo and I was invited to a haiku group. No, not doing ranga, but it's the same. It's a group and they share their haiku, but they work together on the haiku. It's something that we don't. And as I said earlier, the haiku is maybe not a poem in the Western sense because they have a different way of seeing poetry. It used to be a collaborative, a collective work. And we go back to China with Han Shan or Shi Te. They didn't write their poem on their own. We know Han Shan is credited with those fantastic landscape poems, but he didn't write them on his own. It was the result of discussions with other people, but you always have the master, the one that's above, and he gets a credit. And there's still in Japan, the haiku groups are very much a collective social thing where they discuss the haiku, and some of them saying it becomes a haiku, there's a name, but they do say also supported by the group. So it's just not one creation by one person. So that's close to Ranga. But you can inquire, there's a lot of people doing Ranga, I know, online, on Zoom, by email. I don't know personally, okay, a lot of those contacts, but it's possible, you know, some people do that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, and can I just pick up from the chat that Caitlin McNeil has said, Ranga, an interesting point, Ranga sounds like it could almost be compared to Pibroch, developing themes, set rules, judging, and indeed the social collaborative nature of walking songs, where the women would sit and they would clean the wool, sheep's wool or whatever it might be, and they would sing and, you know, contribute collectively to that experience. So does someone else want to come in on that? Sorry. Maybe not. I've got a question from Val Fellows. If the world is the touchstone of truth in the haiku, is it becoming harder to, and then the question runs out, is it, Val, do you want to explain that last point?
Yeah, I don't understand the last word.
It's just been cut off somehow. Is it becoming harder to, see the word?
Right.
And I couldn't see the rest of what I'd written, but I was thinking of global warming and environmental destruction and ecological destruction. And my sentence was going to say, I'm sorry, it was going to say, if the earth is the touchstone of the haiku, is it becoming increasingly hard to write them when that touchstone itself is becoming increasingly hurt? And I forgot to say beforehand, what a wonderful talk, what a wonderfully inspirational talk, Gilles. Thank you, and Norman, your comments. It was wonderful. I should have said that first. And my friend is saying the same.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't think it's harder to write haiku. As I said earlier, people think it's easy. It's not easy or difficult. I don't know. It's a practice, but you can write, as I said, you can write haiku about everything. So even if it's getting harder, you still have. I do a lot of. I don't write a lot of haiku, but I love when it's a good day. I go to my backyard, and it's a very small backyard, and sit down and relax and just look things around me. It can be a leaf that's brought by the wind. It can be a cat passing. It's those things. You're just attentive to things that are, and you realize there's a lot of good things around us. Norman talked about hope. I won't say haiku is a way to be optimistic, but there are good things around us. You know, we can't always be too negative. But I always think that the way of haiku, if it was taught a bit more, maybe in school for kids, or if it was more, I think it brings something. It brings something in your life. For some people, it brings a lot. Some people, it might be just a pause, a 2-minute pause in your day. But I think it brings that. If we go back to Chinese, I had a quote, and I think it's linked with what you say with the world, the touchstone of truth and the world. In Tang poetry, so the origin, the nature poetry of the classic Chinese, there used to be, in their concept or their principle, they say the poem has to have a moment in the poem when or where you raise your head. And I think that's good, even for any poetry. You think if you write something, if at some stage you raise your head, and say raising your head means you raise your consciousness to the universe in the context of the poem. It means the poem becomes an object through which you come to know the way, to know where you are. And I think that's a great thing for even any kind of poetry. You raise your head. I think that's a nice idea to think. It makes you rise, makes you think, and your consciousness that your poem is within the world. It's there. So it's a good principle, I think. I think it's not far from what you said. It made me think of that anyway when I read your thing. So I still don't understand that's SR at the end, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The question was, is it becoming harder to write haiku? And I think you answered that, Gilles. That was the SR was just the
Okay.
yeah. And the point you made about in schools. Now, I've done a number of workshops with primary age children in this part of Argyll, and also in East Kilbride, where I used to live. And I found that without exception, that once the concept of what a haiku is explained to young people, and then you take them outside, they invariably will write a very fresh haiku. I haven't got any examples to hand right now, but I know that's been the case. And also, I've been doing in the workshops, which have been supported by and funded by CHARTS, the Culture, Heritage and Arts Assembly for Argyll and the Isles. We've been doing a whole number of workshops, and in each case, I've included an exercise in what you've been talking about, what a haiku is, and discussing that. And then again, I've found that people will go outside and they will come back with a whole number of, not maybe large numbers, but several haiku that they have come up with, but by using all their senses and by paying attention and giving themselves the space to observe what's around them. Yeah. So it's a good idea to bring it into education. If there's any teachers out there, give it a go, and I bet you'll be surprised or you'll be very pleased.
Yeah, it opens. And it's true, because when you're in school, the kids go outside to see nature, which is good. But I think if you explain haiku, I think they'll open up their mind or perception even more, because they'll try to think what to see or see things. I think it goes a bit deeper than just being in nature. It just gives you that connection. And I go back to that term. I think haiku gives you a connection with nature, with the world. I didn't mention that, but more and more there's haiku now about the world. You know, they call them senryu. They can be funny. We saw one or two of spans. They're fantastic, but it's still a connection to something. But yeah, it's a bit less nature-based, let's say.
Yeah, yeah. Well, again, it's an interesting point that these writing workshops that I've been leading in this part of in the islands, the 4 islands of Argyll here, Kerala, Lismore, Seal, and Ling, that people are able to write haiku. And one of the interesting things is that I have completely unexpectedly, we've 6 new members have joined the Scottish Centre for Geopoetics, but in the course of these workshops so far. And it strikes me that one of the ideas behind this project is to continue with a writing group and an arts crafts group in this part of Argyll. But I think one idea I've just had really the other day was that what should we do in the follow-up next year? Because these free workshops will end then. And I thought, well, we could go out to different parts. We could go out walking, say once a month, and we could write haiku and come back and share them. And I think that would be a good way of keeping a writers group, or in this case, a geopoetics group, going. I don't know what other people think of that idea.
Yeah, people organize that in Japan but they call it ginkgo. People walk in nature for a certain time and then they meet. Again, there's a social dimension to that, but then they meet and then try to write haiku on the spot. It's a nice way of walking. And again, your perception is a bit more sharpened.
Yeah. Alistair, you want to come back in again there?
It's all right. Okay.
Your hand is up, you see.
Another completely different question. I can't make my hand go away. I'm sorry. I mean, to caveat it, I know that poetry or a haiku, whether it's, it's what it says to the individual that is the most important thing. But I am curious, Gilles, what if you were judging haiku, what makes good haiku? When you see something, what is it that you say, yes, that is really good, that is quality, that's an award?
It's a good question, and it's different haiku, and that's the job I have with I'll go back later with Seashores. It's twice a year we receive a lot of haiku, but I have two person with me helping me. I don't believe that one person can always be right on a haiku. And again, I talk about reality, truth, and I know you can be fooled. Some people make up haiku, they invent it, and Basho invented haiku. He wrote haiku from seeing a portrait or a paint, and he used to say it, he used to write it down. So it's not cheating. I like haiku that feels real, and I like haiku that gives a different depth, something it's easy to say, but that you expect. And I could give an example later. Some haiku are nice, but there's some haiku nice, and then you read the second time and you almost say, so what? So it means it's nice, but some you can come back to them a lot. There's some haiku I know them by heart, and every time I read them, they give me the same emotion or the same. There's that depth that you can read, and it's a difficult thing. And in the 40s and the 50s, haiku was criticized in Japan because, and not rightly so. I was about to say rightly so. No, but it's difficult to judge haiku because what they did, a literary critic, he took a lot of haiku from people in the street to famous, and it's right. He took off the names. Once you take off the names, it's true that it was difficult to judge who wrote that haiku. Was it good? And he said that it's not a genre. It's not a genre. It's not artistic. It's very difficult to judge. Anybody can write a good haiku, and he was criticized for that. But I think it's good that anybody can write a good haiku. I don't say it as a negative, but yes, it's true that if you read haiku, you won't know. In poetry, you do read poetry, you know, okay, that's been written by Baudelaire or Rimbaud or whatever, although because we know them, it's maybe not the case. But if you know a poet's style, haiku, they can be very different when you write haiku, but they're still yours. So it's true, it's difficult to judge, but when you read a really good haiku, I try to choose some, and it's very subjective. The ones from Alan Spence, I thought they were very, very good. And I agree, some people might say, what do you see in that? I can take that criticism. It's a question, but it makes you think. But the same as poetry, I guess, but it's more direct with haiku because it's a few words. So I don't know. But I know I like reading good haiku. That's the truth, and I receive a lot of haiku for the Seashores, and that's one of the motivation. You read a lot, but you don't select a lot. And sometimes you're wrong. You take one out that possibly is very good, but you didn't get it. So I don't know, but and that's why I try to choose those ones with Basho and then Spence and Kenneth White to show. That's my feel of haiku, but if Norman had chosen them, maybe he would have chosen different ones.
Yeah, I might well have. Okay, yeah. Michael Roman, wants to come in? Please do. I don't see you on the screen, Michael.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
There's more a question if haiku is produced socially, but how does this solitary reader read haiku? With good haiku, each one should be left with sort of space around it, and the analogy that occurs to me is like going to a picture gallery, where after a certain time you can't. It's tiring, in the sense you're giving attention to it, and you have a limited capacity to appreciate because so it's really to some extent how many haiku can you should you deal with at a particular time, or does it just depend on the person?
I like that space after. Yeah, haiku is small, it's short, but it does have almost an echo. And the good haiku are like the ones that there's a lot of echo. It's like a ripple on a lake, and it goes and goes and goes. It's nice. Yeah.
I like the quote in the chat from Francis Ainsley, who says, haiku often renders great depth through simplicity, like a breath. And I think that's the point you're making, Michael, that you need, it's like take a deep breath and you feel better for it.
Well, I didn't realize I was making that point, but yes, that is the case. I suppose it applies to reading poetry generally, but but that's because I find well with Bashaw's work when he did those more travel books where there was some prose as well as and then whether many haiku or other. That was a way of dealing with the haiku made the impression, but then you also went on to other things, and there, I presume, just to tie it in with geopoetics, that was when Kenneth White talked about way books. There was a certain relationship.
I think there's a strong influence. I think you're right. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So,
and to go back with that, I didn't read it earlier because I think I had spoke enough, but I had a quote from a Chinese poetry, and I think it's very good. And it shows with the haiku, and it shows why we say that it's short or it has a breath and it has space with it. And that even though it's small, it has a depth, it has a scope. And there's in China, they say the Tang say that poetry is perception. And there's two notions. There's a little knowledge and a great knowledge. And a man who is busy doing different things every day has a small knowledge, but is not able to stop and see the world, while someone who's able to stop vain activities can distinguish the world around him, and he can make the difference between beings and things that can reach the great knowledge. This is the great knowledge. I always think haiku is the great knowledge. I know I have to say that, but there are a lot of things in our life that are small knowledge. I like that concept in China, small knowledge, which is still important to have knowledge, and there's a great knowledge. And I think Kenneth White had that ambition. He had a really high ambition in terms of knowledge, and all. There's a high knowledge, there's a great knowledge. And I think he probably was influenced also with that concept in poetry, that there's two different kind of poetry. There's a small poetry, small knowledge, and there's a high knowledge.
Yeah.
And doesn't have to be long. Usually there used to be 4 verses in China.
Yeah, I agree with that. And just to answer Sally Kwan's question from earlier, we think that the quote asking myself what might be a focal point was from Kenneth White and the inaugural text of the International Institute of Geopoetics, which was founded in 1989. And there's another point, just to Errol Livings has raised the point, could one of you summarize quite... Not very familiar with Kenneth White, summarize his work. It's a difficult one. What I would suggest is have a look at our website, www.geopoetics.org.uk, and you will see a sort of a mini biography of White, which needs to be brought up to date. Also, he had a website which is still there, in English as well as French, called kennethwhite.org. 3 W's.kennethwhite.org and then also the International Institute of Geopoetics, again in many languages, has a number of very good essays by White. Basically, his work was in poetry, in essays, and in what Gilles mentioned there, what he called way books, which is sort of creative non-fiction, what's sometimes referred to as travelogues. Now, there's a lot of other questions been coming in, so just talk amongst yourselves while I find them again. They're near the end of the chat. Yeah.
The syllables, it's a huge question in English.
Yeah.
Even in Japanese, the 17 syllables, but from the 20th century, they did change a bit. There was a free verse, a bit like in poetry in the Western. Suddenly we didn't have the rhymes with free verse, free. So they did the same. There's still a majority of people writing in Japan at the moment would still use 575. As I say, with the Kigo, the season word has disappeared at some stage and it came back. But for the West, there's not really a rule. Some people write 575. I think sometimes it's a bit contrived, but there's no rule. The rule I always say, if you can read it in one breath, it's good. It shouldn't be a novel, but it can be short, as you could see with the Alan Spence and Kenneth White. Usually 3 lines. That's because of the translation. That's because in Japanese, even though it's on one line, vertical or horizontal, it used to be 575, very clearly separated, distinct. So they've done that, but some people write haiku in 2 lines. In 1 line, very popular, and they're very good. So there's not really a rule. I wouldn't focus too much on that. I wouldn't be forced to follow that.
Yeah, good point. That's a question I was going to ask. I think many people do write 575, and there's even there's loads of Facebook groups I found today when I was wanted to alert them to this talk. It suddenly occurred to me that I should let haiku groups know, and there's dozens of them all over the world, and I wasn't aware of this till this afternoon. And here's a nice, interesting point from Anne. Thank you for a great presentation, reminding me about the power of haiku. With school children, I found that the boys who are less keen on poetry liked the counting of syllables aspect. So, yeah, so it's appealed to some of the boys in schools. I'm just reading. Oh, it's quite a long quote there. I'll come back to that one. Yes, someone's agreeing it's so accessible to children. And Sukima's making a point, usually created outside, on a walk or a journey, a way of celebrating, memorializing. Yeah. Yeah.
On the spot. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a nice comment from Nancy in joining you from the mountains of North Carolina. This has been lovely, both humbling and inspiring. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Nice to. And just to pick up the point someone asked about, it was a wee bit difficult to follow the PowerPoint along with the with your presentation, Gilles, because you had so much in there. And I think the answer is that we've recorded it, and so you can watch it at your leisure and compare what Gilles has been saying with the PowerPoint presentation. So you will have time if you visit. Yeah, is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you do it backwards, I don't think you hear the devil, do you? No.
Yeah. Here's, I don't know this person. Stuart says, smallish poetry with high knowledge. Look also towards Loreen Nidecker. I don't know.
I don't know. Is that a writer, an author?
Presumably a poet, maybe. Yeah. And there's someone, Sue, is saying, so the accepted form is not strictly 575 syllables. I'd always thought this was a set thing. So
no. And actually, Bissell wrote some that were not 575, not many, okay? But sometimes you can't follow. The same in poetry, the Alexandrine 12 feet or 12 foot is not always followed. It's only 13, you know, there's always the other exception. So I wouldn't stick too much to that rule first. I think first, you know, haiku, you need to have that haiku moment. And you do feel when you read it, that haiku moment will be shared. Because sometimes for you, it means something. You know what you mean, but is it going to be experienced by the reader? And that's always where sometimes the haiku doesn't work. It works for you, but because then it's a bit personal. It's a me. But is the other person going to get it? And it's difficult to judge that. And sometimes we get it wrong. Is that moment, is it going to be shared? And then there's different way of writing. You can change the order of words sometimes, and there's more effect. Or there's a lot of things going into question then.
Now, here's a very interesting point that K. Walton Smith has said. This is so interesting and inspiring. Done lots of collaborative haiku in many different environments, particularly at the Brighton Science Festival.
Okay.
And what she said, people reflected on what they'd experienced at the festival and communicated what they learnt through haiku. Not strictly about the natural world, but there's something so valuable about reflecting on your experiences of the world and condensing it into 17 syllables.
The good sentence, experiences the world, yeah, because I insisted in nature, because that's the origin of haiku, and I think that's where the haiku can bring something. But yes, the world, yeah, let's be honest, it's the world. And
that touches on something that I went to University of Glasgow last Friday, and with the School of Languages and Cultures there, we had planned to have a memorial event for Kenneth White, who died on the 11th of August this year, but it was too soon to have it there. But we discussed plans for next year, and we've even set a potential date in mid-June for this. And part of it we thought might be an outdoor walk, and that we might do write some haiku in the course of the walk. So I think that would be very appropriate. We'll have lots of speakers talking about different aspects of his work, no doubt. But we also thought, again, we would read some of his poems, perhaps Scotia Deserta, one of his sort of signature poems, and that we might accompany that with, say, viola and guitar, or some music specially composed on the occasion. So I think we're talking about the 14th or thereabouts of June. But I'll in the follow-up to this event, I'll confirm the dates for that, so you can put it in your diary. It'll be a live event, and it will be based at the University of Glasgow, because that's where he got his first degree, and it's also where he went, as I mentioned earlier, as a lecturer. He also was given an honorary degree by the University of Glasgow, as well as Heriot Watt University in Edinburgh.
Right. Maybe Norman, I mentioned a bit his book.
Yeah, please.
So that's the Kenneth White book. So I met him a few years ago. I met him a long time ago in Paris in his speech, and then True Seashore. So that's I can start with Seashore. That's actually the latest one. It's only out today. That's issue 11. So it's twice a year, and there's essays on it, articles. There's 2 essays by Kenneth White in the number 10 and number 11, and there's a selection of haiku and some essays. It's twice a year, and because I contacted him to say, would he be interested in writing an essay for Seashores? And he said, well, let's do it right. And I've got a lot of essays. And he said, would you publish it? So I said, I'm a small publisher in Dublin. He said, this is not important. So 3 years ago, we worked a lot, and there's 8 essays in English. I think the first time they were published together, and some of them were non-published. And he made also a selection of 40 of his favorite haiku. So it's a great book, and it's his vision of a haiku. It helped me a bit for my vision. Sometimes we do meet with the Way of Haiku. He was really into the Way of Haiku. That's why I wanted at the end to talk about that high knowledge and small knowledge. I think this is in there also between the lines. So it's called Eyes Wide Open. It's on the haiku path. So if you have at the end, I can show the contact, but it's easy. But it's a good book about haiku. But again, in his view, in his perspective with geopoetics. But it's a nice little book.
Yeah. There are new essays I hadn't seen. I remember he did a short piece about haiku walking previously, but there are definitely new things that haven't been published before there, and a lot of his haiku are included. So I would highly recommend it.
And some were never published in English, and there's a few that were handwritten, so they're unpublished at the moment anyway.
He sent you handwritten ones?
Yeah.
Well, maybe we could, for the Geopoetics archive here in Ling, maybe you could send us a copy of, photocopy of the original.
Yeah, if I can, that's no problem.
no rush, no rush. But that's one of the things we're trying to do, because we want the centre here to be a place for artist residencies, especially for artists who want to study geopoetics, whether it's in writing or in their creative expression in painting or whatever it might be. So we have to assemble an archive here. I've got loads of correspondence and essays and all the rest of it, which needs to be put together. But that's something for next year that we hope to be able to do that. And I've just seen another.
So I think Sukema asked, I hope I've answered in a way. I didn't hear a question, but to say more about journal. So it's a coincidence I talked about it. So as I say, it's twice a year. It's €10 plus postage. And there's a section called the Sources of Haiku. And every thing we translate with Alain Kervern, is a French scholar, is a Japanese translator, and we translate some of the Saijiki, and it's fascinating. It's all those season words in Japan for different seasons. For example, it's the winter. So it explains, for example, Kuma, the bear, and they explain the bear in Japan, and they give 1 or 2 examples in haiku, and it's fascinating. It's more than poetry. It just goes into civilization, opening a window. It's fantastic. So that's what we do.
Yeah, I'm very sorry, Arwa. I'm from Cardiff University. You raised your hand some time ago. Do you want to come in and contribute? Ask to unmute. Yeah. I've been so busy reading the chat.
Yes. Yes, thank you. You know, I didn't mind. It was lovely hearing the talks and discussion afterwards. So I just wanted to ask about the role of meditation with haiku, because I've held a workshop at National Museum Wales in response to Gary Miller's Sea Horizons exhibition. And then the way it was structured is that we had like a poetic visualization meditation where the participants were encouraged to kind of delve into their feelings and emotions. And I know that the haiku doesn't center like the I and nature, but I was wondering more about the connection one has with nature, because I felt like that was quite a productive exercise, because the participants who had no experience writing haikus before seemed to really connect with the form once it was connected to the idea of meditation and, you know, thinking about nature and visualizing sea horizons. So if you could say more about that, please. Yeah, thank you.
Well, it's an exercise. I know a lot of people write haiku after meditation. They do say, because it is that connection again with the world, and that relaxation. I talk about a breathing space, a bit of a pause. You have that. Some people, I usually call it contemplation. I like the term contemplation. I think haiku also comes from meditation, personal meditation or meditation on the world, or contemplation. It is, as I said earlier, it's an observation exercise. It's a perception exercise, and you need to feel connected with the world. And for a lot of people, meditation does help that, and does have other benefits also, of course. But again, it's that connection with the world. I think meditation brings you to a different place, to a different, and that's very much the nature of haiku. I think there's a lot of common points. I hope I answered properly.
Yeah, I would agree that I sat with as part of the Glasgow Zen group for off and on for about 6 years, and we went on sessions, like a long weekend away, and very intensive zazen. And when you came on the way back, when you left after days of sitting, your mind was as clear as a piece of crystal glass. It was everything. The world just seemed so refreshed. And we went to a place called Glenkin at the back of Dunoon, and I wrote a series of haiku about that session at Glenkin, and it's published in my poetry book, Slate, Sea and Sky. So it worked for me, and I do feel the need now and again to go back to proper meditation, but it hasn't happened yet. So, but I would agree, and I think it's no accident that many of the great haiku writers were Zen monks. You know.
Yeah, or very influenced. Yeah, like
yeah.
It's in that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, and yeah, there's another one here. I think we need to sort of wind up.
Okay.
And maybe finish with 1 or 2 poems.
Okay.
I'll just go and get the 1 or 2 of the Glenkin ones for you.
Okay.
Carry on. Sorry, Gilles, you want to fire away 1 or 2 just now?
Yeah, I can do a few. I'll put a few. And see, that's from my collection. Along the way, there's a strong influence you can't write. It's all my travels, 35 or 36 countries. So in the world, so it's a bit every continent. And also, I didn't go on to that, it's more technical, but I think also haiku is so precise. It has that spirit of place also. When you see a haiku, it does, and Matsubashi has that fantastically. You read some haiku, you can see that haiku earlier with the people in that small house. You just can see life around that. You can see what it means. Haiku is that, although it's very few words, but as I said, they're very precise. So I read a few, from this one's from Africa. There's a bit everywhere. So I put some, having seen, I'm going to read it twice, because in Japan, originally people read twice. We didn't need that because it was on the presentation. And they said they usually read twice. The first time is to enter the mind, and the second time is to try to stay in the heart. So hopefully the second reading will work. If it doesn't work, I'll have to read it 10 times, but we don't have the time. So having seen what is to be seen, back into the sand slips the single-clawed crab. Having seen what's to be seen, back into the sand slips the single-clawed crab. In Cameroon, machine gun strapped to the soldier's back like moms carry babies here. Machine gun strapped to the soldier's back like moms carry babies here.
Mm-hmm.
And you want some from Scotland?
Yes, please.
And there's a fan of Wales. There was somebody from Cardiff, here from Cardiff. With a coal miner's pick, let me carve a block out of this wall built by exploited men. It was a Cardiff castle. With a coal miner's pick, let me carve a block out of this wall built by exploited men. So you see, I think haiku, some people would not agree with that haiku, but it can be also talking about the world and talking about everything. So Scotland, you probably know Gosford Sands, north of Edinburgh. It's a nice part of the sea, north of Edinburgh. Getting into the cold sea, a scar on my instep I had forgotten. Getting into the cold sea, a scar on my instep I had forgotten. And one for the Scottish, a really typical spirit place in Edinburgh, North Sea breeze. Seated on a granite bench, two lads in kilts. North Sea breeze. Seated on a granite bench, two lads in kilts. That's it.
Okay. Is that you then, Gilles? Yeah.
Yeah, that's enough. Yeah, there's a lot of them in there.
Yeah, it's a great book. I highly recommend it. I'm amazed at all the different countries that Gilles has been to. It's and written haiku about related to. It really is a treasure trove. I so enjoyed it when I first received it, and it now makes me want to go back to it, Gilles. Thank you. Thanks so much. I'll read a few short ones. I mentioned Glenn Kinn, and I've got this old book. Rita has mentioned there about working with a photographer to produce a book of haiku and with photographs. Well, this book here has got photographs by Oscar Mazzaroli, and I chose those with his widow and his daughter some years ago. But this is from Glenn Kinn. A row of old birch, sprouting lichen beards, a stillness here. A row of old birch, sprouting lichen beards, a stillness here. Last year, that hillside ravaged and scarred, now green life returns. Last year, that hillside ravaged and scarred, now green life returns. And here's a last one from that group. On a deep pool bottom, grey and brown shingle, crystal clear. On a deep pool bottom, grey and brown shingle, crystal clear. And a few more recent ones from, when we were doing some of the haiku walking and in the workshops. Sunshine 1 minute, pouring down the next, the Glasgow Fair. Sunshine 1 minute, pouring down or pissing down the next, the Glasgow Fair. That's one for the Glasgow folk. Sparrows live rent-free in the loft of Cullerpool Hall. Sparrows live rent-free in the loft of Cullerpool Hall. And flying ants by the door, noisy sparrows, ants no more. Flying ants by the door, noisy sparrows, ants no more. And I'll finish with this one. Our island school is 250 years old, and they want to close it. Our island school is 250 years old, and they want to close it. So I think that'll do.
I will share the screen just to give you information, and you're welcome to contact me, or if you have any question. It goes back to the start. Didn't expect that.
Yeah,
But I'd put it on the right one. So if you have any question, you see the website Haiku Spirit. That's question for seashores haiku, or haiku spirit, or haikuspirit.org. There's two, and that's, you can order seashores. That's the number 11. It just was out today from the printer. I don't know in Scotland. It's very difficult to find printer in Ireland, so it took me a long time. I'll have it next week. Start posting it. That's my book. It's only words in that book. There's no photo. I made it. It's only words. The whole book is only words, as you can see, even on the cover, with all the different places. And then that's Kenneth White's book. Also, so with any of those website, the website or those email address, you can contact me if you have any question. And on the website Haiku Spirit, there's one page called Guidelines or Tips for Haiku. And in a way, if you want to write haiku, again, nobody holds the truth. It's only some suggestions, some possibility, but it gives you an idea also what to do, the usual traps, or the experience as an editor of a journal where we receive a lot of haiku. So it's kind of a selection of tips or things and say, okay, maybe that could be done, etc. So you're welcome. And there's also some examples of haiku, a lot of translation I did, and a lot of writers there. It's all free, so you might be interested in having a look, and don't hesitate to contact me or contact Norman for that. Okay, just want to thank you. Thanks for your patience.
Yeah, and I'd like to thank you all for your attention.
That's haiku.
Yeah, and it's great that so many of you have been able to stay right through with us. It's been a very encouraging event, and the chat, I will save the chat and send it to you in probably early next week, since we've got all these workshops over the weekend on Lismore and Seal.
And Norman, I'll send you the presentation. If you want to send them the presentation, you're welcome.
Wow.
To share.
Wow.
You know, it's only a PowerPoint. It's not a large file. So I'll send it to you tomorrow.
Oh, that's
I'm happy
fantastic.
to share.
Well, I'll be delighted to share that with everyone. And you people have been asking, and they've now got the links, the website addresses, and they've also got your email address there on the screen just now.
Or through the website also, there's email address, so it should be fine.
Yeah, and again, when we'll be, I'll edit just to put up some titles at the beginning and the end of the recording, and we'll give you the Geopoetics website link, and my own website link will come in that too. So thanks everyone again, and particularly warm thanks to Gilles. A fantastic presentation, as I thought it would be, and I hope, as someone has said, I'm going off to write some haiku now.
That's good.
What better way to celebrate tonight's performance and presentation by Gilles Gilles Fabre, and so grateful to you, Gilles, and hope
No
to
problem,
see.
you're welcome.
Yeah, it's been very encouraging and very inspiring, your presentation. I've learned a lot, and I think everyone else who's been here has too. So I'll close now, unless anyone has last minute anything. No, going, gone.
Gone.
Okay.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks again. All the best.